The story in Judges 19 is one of the most haunting and disturbing tales in the Bible. Many people haven't heard of it, yet it holds important messages about human choices, the consequences of sin, and what happens when a community turns away from God. It's a story that makes us ask big questions about justice, kindness, and what we are willing to tolerate in our society. The story begins with a man who was a Levite. Levites were from the tribe of Levi, chosen by God to be priests and help guide Israel in worship and daily life. But this Levite wasn't acting in a way that would honor his position. He had a concubine, a woman he lived with, but wasn't fully married to. One day, the concubine left him and went back to her father's house in Bethlehem. We're not told exactly why she left, but we know that 4 months passed before the Levite decided to go after her. Maybe he wanted her back, or maybe he was embarrassed. Regardless of his reasons, he traveled to Bethlehem to bring her home. When he got there, the woman's father was very welcoming. In fact, he urged the Levite to stay for several days. They ate, drank, and enjoyed each other's company. But eventually, the Levite insisted it was time to go. Afterward, when her father begged him to stay another night, he finally said, "No, we must be on our way," Judges 19 verse 9. They left in the evening, even though it would be dangerous to travel at night. As the sun started to set, they came near a city called Jebus, which would later be known as Jerusalem. The Levite's servant suggested stopping there for the night, but the Levite refused. "We will not turn aside to a city of foreigners who do not belong to the people of Israel," he said, Judges 19 verse 12. Instead, he chose to continue to Gibeah, a city of the Benjaminites, one of Israel's tribes. The Levite thought that his fellow Israelites would treat him better than strangers would. When they arrived in Gibeah, no one offered them a place to stay. They sat in the town square, waiting, hoping someone would notice them. Hospitality was a big part of their culture, but this town didn't seem interested in welcoming strangers. Finally, an old man came along. He saw them and offered them a place to stay. "Peace be to you. Let all your needs be on me," he told them, welcoming them into his home, Judges 19 verse 20. The Levite, his concubine, and his servant went with the old man, grateful for his kindness. But what they didn't know was that trouble was waiting for them in Gibeah. As night fell, wicked men from the city surrounded the house. They started pounding on the door and shouting. These men demanded that the Levite come out so they could abuse him. Their intentions were violent and horrific. In a panic, the old man who had given them shelter tried to reason with the mob. "Do not act so wickedly," he pleaded. "Since this man has come into my house, do not do this vile thing." Judges 19 verse 23. He was desperate to protect his guests because, in their culture, hospitality was sacred. Guests were to be cared for and defended, even at great cost. In a heartbreaking attempt to satisfy the men outside, the old man offered his own daughter and the Levite's concubine instead. "Behold, here is my virgin daughter and his concubine. Let me bring them out now. Violate them and do with them what seems good to you. But against this man, do not do this outrageous thing," he said, Judges 19 verse 24. The crowd wouldn't listen. Eventually, in a shocking turn, the Levite pushed his concubine out to the mob. They abused her throughout the night, only leaving her at dawn. She managed to crawl back to the doorway of the house, where she collapsed. When the Levite woke up in the morning, he opened the door to find his concubine lying there. Coldly, he told her, "Get up, let's go." But there was no answer. She was dead. The Bible doesn't describe any grief or sorrow from him. He simply picked her up, put her on his donkey, and went home. What happened next was even more shocking. The Levite took his concubine's body, divided it into 12 parts, and sent each piece to one of the 12 tribes of Israel. It was a gruesome message, a call for justice, and for people to see the horror of what had happened in Gibeah. And all who saw it said, "Such a thing has never happened or been seen from the day that the people of Israel came up out of the land of Egypt until this day. Consider it, take counsel, and speak," Judges 19 verse 30. The whole nation was shaken. They couldn't ignore what had happened. The Levite's message demanded action and a response from the people of Israel. The gruesome message spread across Israel, reaching each of the 12 tribes. People were horrified by what they heard and saw. Something this terrible, this brutal, had not happened since Israel had become a nation. The act was so shocking that it united the tribes in outrage. Representatives from every tribe gathered together to discuss how they would respond. They came together at a place called Mizpah, where they asked the Levite to tell them exactly what had happened. The Levite explained, but he put the blame entirely on the men of Gibeah, the Benjaminites. He didn't mention his own part in sending his concubine out to the mob, but he made sure that everyone understood the horror that had happened in that town. The people of Israel were outraged. They agreed that this evil could not go unpunished. All the people rose as one man, saying, "None of us will go to his tent, and none of us will return to his house. But now this is what we will do to Gibeah. We will go up against it by lot." Judges 20 verses 8 to 9. They decided that they would not go home until justice was done. They would gather an army, march to Gibeah, and demand that the men responsible be handed over for punishment. This was their plan to purge the evil from their nation. When the other 11 tribes confronted the tribe of Benjamin, they expected cooperation. Surely the Benjaminites would want to root out this wickedness from among their people. But the tribe of Benjamin refused. They wouldn't hand over the men of Gibeah. Instead, they chose to defend them. This decision set the stage for a terrible conflict. Benjamin was standing against the rest of Israel, refusing to bring justice for the horrific crime that had happened in Gibeah. This was a heartbreaking moment. Rather than doing what was right, the Benjaminites chose loyalty to their tribe over loyalty to God and his laws. They were willing to fight their own brothers to protect evil within their ranks. Israel's response was swift. They gathered an army of 400,000 soldiers and prepared to go to war against Benjamin. The Benjaminites, though smaller in number, were skilled warriors and didn't back down. They gathered their own army of 26,000, along with 700 chosen men who were left-handed and could sling stones with deadly accuracy. The first battle was brutal. Israel suffered heavy losses. Despite their greater numbers, they were defeated, losing 22,000 men. Shocked, they regrouped and sought guidance from God, asking if they should continue fighting. God told them to go back into battle. The second battle ended similarly, with Israel suffering another devastating loss of 18,000 men. Israel was confused and devastated. They were fighting for justice, but they were losing. They didn't understand why this was happening. In desperation, they fasted, prayed, and offered sacrifices to God, asking once again if they should fight Benjamin. This time, God answered, "Go up, for tomorrow I will give them into your hand." Judges 20 verse 28. With God's assurance, Israel prepared for a final battle. This time, they set an ambush. Part of their army drew the Benjaminites out of Gibeah, pretending to retreat. As the Benjaminites pursued, another group of Israelite soldiers entered the city and set it on fire. When the Benjaminites saw the smoke rising, they realized too late that they were trapped. The final battle was devastating. Israel's army overwhelmed the Benjaminites, killing nearly every soldier. Only a small group of 600 men managed to escape to the wilderness, where they hid for months. The tribe of Benjamin was almost wiped out. When the battle ended, Israel was left with a sobering reality. In their pursuit of justice, they had nearly destroyed an entire tribe. They had fought their own brothers, and now Benjamin was on the verge of extinction. After the dust settled, the Israelites began to mourn. They realized that their actions, though driven by a desire for justice, had come at a terrible cost. The tribe of Benjamin, one of the 12 tribes of Israel, was nearly gone. They were heartbroken, asking themselves how things had come to this. How could something so evil, so horrific, have happened among God's people? And the people of Israel had compassion for Benjamin their brother and said, "One tribe is cut off from Israel this day." Judges 21 verse 6. They felt a deep sense of loss and responsibility. They didn't want to see Benjamin vanish from their nation. So they devised a plan to help the surviving men find wives and rebuild their tribe. It was a tragic attempt to undo some of the damage, but the scars of what happened in Gibeah would never truly heal. This story in Judges 19 to 21 is one of the Bible's most unsettling accounts. It shows the extreme darkness that can take root when people turn away from God's guidance and let sin run unchecked. The consequences of one horrific act rippled out to touch an entire nation, leading to war, loss, and sorrow. The story raises hard questions about justice, forgiveness, and the lengths people will go to protect their own. It's a cautionary tale that reminds us of the dangers of ignoring evil, the cost of loyalty to the wrong things, and the importance of holding on to God's guidance even in difficult times. As the Israelites mourned the near loss of an entire tribe, they faced a moral and spiritual crisis. They couldn't ignore the evil that had happened in Gibeah, and their sense of justice had led them to war. But now, with Benjamin nearly wiped out, they realized that their actions had left the nation broken. They were not just mourning the lost lives, but also the fracture of their unity as a people of God. To make things worse, Israel had made a vow during the heat of their anger. They had sworn that none of them would give their daughters to the men of Benjamin as wives. This meant that the surviving 600 men of Benjamin had no one to marry, no way to rebuild their families. The tribe was on the brink of extinction. In their sorrow, the Israelites gathered at Bethel, a sacred place, to seek God's guidance once more. And the people came to Bethel and sat there till evening before God. And they lifted up their voices and wept bitterly. And they said, "O Lord, the God of Israel, why has this happened in Israel, that today there should be one tribe lacking in Israel?" Judges 21 verses 2-3. They didn't want Benjamin to disappear, but they were also bound by their oath. After much discussion, the leaders came up with a solution, though it was complicated and sorrowful. First, they decided to find people in Israel who hadn't joined the battle against Benjamin. They discovered that no one from Jabesh Gilead, a town in Israel, had come to fight with them. So, they sent soldiers to Jabesh Gilead to bring back young women who could become wives for the Benjaminites. This plan was harsh, and it shows the intense struggle Israel faced in balancing their desire for justice with the need to preserve their people. The soldiers brought back 400 young women from Jabesh Gilead and gave them to the Benjaminites. But there were still not enough wives for the 600 men. The leaders then thought of another solution, one that again reflects the strange and tragic consequences of Israel's choices. They remembered that every year, the people of Israel held a festival in Shiloh. It was a time of dancing and celebration, and many young women would attend. The leaders advised the men of Benjamin to go to the festival in Shiloh, and when they saw the young women dancing, to take them as wives. This plan, though unusual, allowed the Benjaminites to find wives without breaking the oath Israel had made. The remaining Benjaminites went to Shiloh, followed this plan, and took wives from the women at the festival. And the people of Benjamin did so, and took their wives, according to their number, from the dancers whom they carried off. Then they went and returned to their inheritance, and rebuilt the towns, and lived in them. Judges 21 verse 23. With this, Benjamin was able to begin rebuilding. They settled in their lands, started families, and slowly began to recover. This story in Judges ends on a bittersweet note. The tribe of Benjamin was saved, but the way it happened left deep wounds. The entire nation of Israel was left with memories of conflict, suffering, and loss. The closing verse of Judges speaks volumes about the state of Israel during this time. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. Judges 21 verse 25. This sentence captures the chaos, the moral decay, and the lack of direction that defined this period. Israel had no central leadership, no strong guidance, and no unity under God. People made decisions based on their own understanding and desires, often leading to tragic outcomes. The story of Judges 19-21 is a harsh reminder of what happens when people stray from the ways of justice, compassion, and godly wisdom. It's a story that shows us the danger of living without accountability, of turning a blind eye to evil, and of losing sight of the values that hold a community together. The nation's initial failure to protect the vulnerable led to a cycle of violence and loss that affected every tribe. This account urges readers to think about the importance of standing up for justice, but also of seeking mercy and understanding, even in difficult situations. For those who come across this story today, it's normal to feel disturbed, saddened, or even angry. Stories like this are not easy to read. They bring up emotions and questions about the nature of justice, forgiveness, and the deep impact of choices. Some might ask why this story is even in the Bible, but perhaps it's there to remind us of the worst consequences when we stray from what is right. It reveals the brokenness that can happen in any society if people refuse to address wrongdoing and fail to protect those who are vulnerable. In many ways, Judges 19 is a call to action, a call to pursue justice, but also to temper it with mercy and compassion. It challenges us to reflect on our own communities, our own relationships, and our own choices. Are we seeking to uphold values that protect and strengthen others? Or are we letting selfishness and fear take over? Are we willing to confront evil, but also willing to seek healing and restoration? While this story leaves us with hard truths, it also points to the need for a leader who can guide with wisdom, compassion, and strength, a role that, in the context of Israel's history, would eventually be filled through the coming of Jesus, who brought a message of justice and love. In the darkest parts of Israel's story, we can see a longing for a true king, one who would set things right and restore the broken. Thank you for watching. If this story shocked you, there are so many more untold and surprising moments in the Bible to explore. Hit subscribe and join us as we dig deeper into these hidden stories and uncover their powerful messages.